The morning they knocked on my door, I had just finished my second cup of coffee. I looked through the peephole and saw them standing there. My father in his wool coat, my mother clutching her handbag the way she always did when she was nervous. They looked older. They looked like they needed something. I didn't open the door right away. I stood there for a moment, very still, and I thought about a hospital room in Greenwich, Connecticut, a consent form I signed alone, a phone that didn't ring for 9 days. What my parents did not know, what they could not have known, was that the $47 million deal they had spent 2 years building was sitting in my hands. Every dollar of it. One signature away from mine. I set down my coffee. I smoothed my jacket. And I opened the door. Before I continue, tell me where you're watching from in the comments below. And hit like and subscribe if you've ever been left alone by the one person who was supposed to show up. People who grow up in families like mine learn two sets of rules very early. The first set is the one everyone sees. Sunday dinners at the house in Darien, the right schools, the right clubs, the right last name. Richard and Diane Ward were not cruel people in the way that word usually gets used. They didn't shout. They didn't throw things. What they did was quieter than that, and in some ways harder to name. The second set of rules was the one that actually governed everything. And in our house, that set had one foundational principle. My brother Derek was the one who mattered. Derek was 4 years older than me. He was the firstborn, the son, the one my father had already mentally installed at the head of Ward Properties LLC before Derek had even graduated high school. When Derek got a C in economics, my father hired a tutor and called it a rough semester. When I graduated summa cum laude from UConn with a finance degree, my mother said, "That's wonderful, honey," and then asked if I was seeing anyone. I don't tell you this to sound bitter. I tell you this because you need to understand the architecture of the family I grew up in, so that what happened later makes complete sense. I moved to a one-bedroom in Greenwich when I was 24. I got a job as a junior analyst at Hargrove Capital, a mid-sized private equity firm with offices in Manhattan. I was good at it, better than good, actually. By the time I was 29, I had been promoted twice and was sitting in on deals worth north of $30 million. I read contracts the way other people read menus. Quickly, thoroughly, catching the things that weren't supposed to be caught. My father knew I worked in finance. He mentioned it at dinner parties occasionally, the way you mention a piece of furniture you're proud of, but don't particularly use. Chelsea's in private equity, he'd say, and then turn the conversation back to Derek's latest project, a mixed-use development in Stamford that was, by most measurable standards, underperforming. My mother's relationship with me was warmer on the surface and colder underneath. Diane Ward was a woman who expressed love through logistics. She remembered my coffee order. She sent birthday cards that arrived exactly on time. But when I called her after a hard week at work, she had a way of listening that felt like waiting. Like she was holding space in the conversation for a problem she actually knew how to solve, and my problems never quite qualified. I had learned not to need too much from them. That's the adaptation you make, growing up the way I did. You get efficient. You figure out which emotional needs you can meet yourself, and you quietly stop presenting the others for consideration. I had a good life in Greenwich, a small circle of real friends, a job I was genuinely good at, a savings account I'd built carefully over 7 years. I ran on Sunday mornings along the river path. I had a standing dinner reservation at an Italian place on Greenwich Avenue that knew my order. I was not unhappy. And then, on a Tuesday in October, I woke up at 3 a.m. with a pain in my lower right abdomen that I initially dismissed as a bad meal. By 5 a.m., I was on the floor of my bathroom. By 6:15, I was in the back of an Uber to Greenwich Hospital. Hunched over my phone, texting my manager that I wouldn't be in. It was appendicitis. Acute, the ER doctor said, with early signs of perforation. They needed to operate within the hour. A nurse handed me a consent form on a clipboard, and I sat in a hospital bed in a paper gown and signed my name alone, and then I called my mother. She picked up on the third ring. I could hear the sound of rolling luggage in the background. "Mom," I said, "I'm at the hospital. I need surgery this morning." There was a pause. Then, "Oh, Chelsea, what happened?" I told her. "Appendicitis, perforated, surgery in an hour, Greenwich Hospital." Another pause. "Longer this time, honey," she said. "We're at the port. We board in 40 minutes. The cruise, we've had this booked since January." I didn't say anything. "You know how hard it's been to get your father to take a real vacation," she continued. "And the doctors are right there with you. You're in good hands. You're so strong, Chelsea. You always land on your feet." The nurse was signaling me from the doorway. It was time. Okay, Mom, I said. We'll call when we dock in Nassau, she said. You'll be home by then. I'm sure of it. She hung up. I handed the clipboard back to the nurse, and then they wheeled me down a hallway under fluorescent lights, and I went under alone. I want to be precise about what the next 9 days actually looked like, because I think people sometimes imagine hospital stays as something cinematic. A montage of beeping monitors and soft light through Venetian blinds, someone squeezing your hand at the right moment. It wasn't like that. The surgery took 2.5 hours. The appendix had already perforated by the time they got in, which meant there was infection to clear. I woke up in recovery at just past noon with a drain in my abdomen and a level of pain that the nurse described as expected, and I would describe as the worst thing I have ever felt in my body. They moved me to a room on the fourth floor. It had a window that faced a parking garage. My phone was on the tray table next to me. I looked at it for a long time before I picked it up. There was a text from my mother, sent at 8:47 a.m. while I was still in surgery. Thinking of you, sweetheart. The ship is beautiful. Doctor said you'll be up and around in no time. Love you. There was nothing from my father. There was a voicemail from Derek, left at around 2 p.m. I played it once. He said he'd heard from Mom, said that sounded rough. Said he had a site walkthrough in Stamford he couldn't move, but maybe he'd try to swing by later in the week. He did not swing by later in the week. I put the phone face down on the tray table, and I looked at the parking garage out the window, and I breathed very carefully, because breathing hurt, and I thought about the fact that there was not a single person in the world who was going to walk through that door. The nurses were kind. I want to say that clearly. There was one in particular, a woman named Gloria who worked the overnight shift, who had a way of checking on me that didn't feel clinical. She'd ask how the pain was, adjust the pillow, linger for a moment before she left. I think she understood more about my situation than I ever said out loud. On the third night, when I was running a low fever and couldn't sleep, she sat at the edge of the chair by my bed for 20 minutes and just talked to me about her daughter's school play. It was the kindest thing anyone did for me that entire week. My father called on day 4. I was sitting up for the first time, trying to eat a cup of chicken broth that tasted like warm cardboard. "How are you feeling?" he asked. His voice had the particular quality it got when he was calling out of obligation. Slightly clipped, efficient, ready to wrap up. Better, I said, still on IV antibiotics. They're watching the infection. Good, good. A pause. The weather here has been extraordinary. Your mother's gotten some color. I held the phone, and I listened to my father tell me about the weather in the Caribbean while I sat in a hospital bed on day 4 of a post-surgical infection, and I felt something happen inside me that I can only describe as a door closing. Not slamming. Not a dramatic moment. Just a quiet, definitive click. "That's nice, Dad," I said. "You've always been the tough one," he said. "You get that from me." I didn't respond to that. We said goodbye. I finished the broth. I put the phone face down again. On day 6, the fever broke. On day 7, they removed the drain, which was its own particular experience I won't detail here. On day 8, my attending physician, a soft-spoken man named Dr. Okonkwo, told me that everything looked clean and that I could likely go home the following morning if I continued improving. He shook my hand when he said it. He had warm eyes, and I was so grateful for the basic human decency of that handshake that I had to look away. My mother texted that evening, a photo of a sunset over open water. "So beautiful here. Miss you. Almost home. You must be feeling so much better by now." 3 exclamation points. A sun emoji. I was discharged on a Thursday morning. I signed the paperwork. A nurse went over the post-discharge instructions. Limited activity, no lifting, follow up with my GP in 7 days, watch for fever or unusual pain. She handed me a folder. She asked if someone was coming to pick me up. "Yes," I said. "My ride's already here." I opened the Uber app in the elevator. I had a small bag with my clothes from the day I came in, my laptop, my charger. The driver was a man named Terrence, who had a Pine air freshener hanging from the mirror and was listening to a sports talk radio program at low volume. He helped me with my bag when I moved, slowly getting in. It was a 12-minute drive back to my apartment. I tipped him 30%. I unlocked my front door, set my bag down inside, and stood in my own living room for a moment. It was quiet. The plants needed watering. There was a coffee cup in the sink from the morning I'd left, 11 days ago. Everything exactly where I had left it, completely indifferent to what had happened to me. I watered the plants. I rinsed the cup. I took my pain medication with a full glass of water the way the discharge instructions said to, and then I sat down on the couch. Opened my laptop and I started to read. I wasn't looking for anything specific, not yet. I was just reading. Financial filings mostly. Old habits. My brain had always gone there when I needed to feel in control of something. And that is when I found the first document about Ward Properties. I almost scrolled past it. I almost did. The document was a capital call notice. I found it because Ward Properties LLC was registered in Connecticut, and Connecticut has a reasonably transparent business filing system, if you know where to look. I knew where to look. It's the kind of thing you learn when you spend 6 years analyzing the ownership structures of mid-market companies for a living. You develop a habit of pulling threads. The notice was dated 3 weeks before my surgery. It was a request for additional capital contributions from existing members, which in plain language means the company needed money and was asking its owners to put more in. The amount requested was not small, $1.4 million, to be split among members according to their ownership percentage. I sat with that for a moment. Ward Properties had been my father's company for 22 years. Mixed-use commercial and residential developments across Fairfield County. It had always been presented to us, to me and Derek and our mother, as a solid and self-sustaining operation. My father spoke about it the way men of his generation speak about things they've built, with a particular combination of pride and impatience, as though the company's success were both obvious and somehow still underappreciated. He did not discuss financials with us. He did not discuss much of anything with us, really, when it came to the business. But capital call notices don't lie. They exist because the money isn't there. I pulled more documents. It took me the better part of 2 days. I was still moving slowly, still taking the pain medication on schedule, still sleeping more than I was used to. But I sat on that couch with my laptop and a legal pad, and I worked through what I could find, and what I found told a story my father had been very careful not to tell anyone. Ward Properties was leveraged. Significantly. 2 of their larger development projects had run over budget, one in Norwalk and one in Westport. A commercial tenant in their Stamford property, Derek's project, the underperforming one, had broken their lease early, and the space had been sitting vacant for 7 months. The company had taken on a bridge loan at an interest rate that made me wince. They were servicing debt on 4 properties simultaneously. The capital call was not a routine ask. It was a sign that the cushion was gone. I made a note on my legal pad, circled it twice. Then I kept reading. What I found next took me longer to understand, because it was buried in a way that suggested someone had put effort into the burying. A minority stake, 34% of Ward Properties LLC, had been quietly made available. Not publicly listed, not announced. The kind of offering that gets communicated through attorneys and handshakes and conversations at the right dinner tables. Someone inside the company, or very close to it, had authorized the sale of its stake without making noise about it. I stared at that number for a long time. 34% of a company is not a controlling interest. My father, I estimated, held somewhere around 51% directly, with the remainder split between a small group of original investors who had been with him since the early 2000s. But 34% is not nothing. In the right circumstances, 34% is a veto. In the right circumstances, 34% is the difference between a deal closing and a deal dying. I knew this because I had structured deals exactly like this on the other side of the table for 6 years. I closed my laptop. I took my evening medication. I stood at the kitchen window for a while and looked out at the street below, at the ordinary Tuesday evening of Greenwich, Connecticut. A woman walking a dog, a man unloading groceries from his car, headlights moving slowly through the intersection. My parents were somewhere over the Atlantic by then, heading home from 14 days of Caribbean sunshine. In 4 days they would be back in Darien, tanned and rested, and my mother would call me and ask how I was feeling, and I would say, fine, and she would say, wonderful, and neither of us would say the thing that was actually true. I thought about Gloria, the overnight nurse, and her daughter's school play. I thought about Terrence and his Pine air freshener. I thought about signing a surgical consent form alone. Then I went back to the couch, opened my laptop again, and I called my attorney. Her name was Patricia Hollins. I had used her twice before for contract reviews at work, small things. She was sharp and unhurried, and she charged $480 an hour, which I had always considered entirely fair for the quality of her thinking. I left her a voicemail at 9:15 on a Wednesday night, and she called me back at 7:50 the next morning. I told her what I had found. I told her what I was thinking. There was a pause on her end, the kind that means someone is genuinely processing rather than just waiting for you to finish. You understand, Patricia said, that if you do this correctly, they will have no idea it's you. That's the point, I said. And you're certain about the capital? I had $280,000 in savings. I had a brokerage account I hadn't touched in 4 years worth another $61,000. And I had a health insurance claim that was still pending, a significant one, given the length of my stay and the complexity of the billing. Patricia told me to get that claim resolved before we moved. I spent the next 3 weeks doing exactly that. I was meticulous about it. I documented everything, every line item from the hospital bill, every insurance communication, every medical record. My insurer initially pushed back on a portion of the claim. $43,000 they categorized as elective, which was a characterization so medically inaccurate it almost impressed me. I sent a 12-page appeal letter that I wrote myself, with supporting documentation from Dr. Okonkwo's notes and 3 paragraphs of relevant Connecticut insurance statute. They reversed the denial within 10 days. Full reimbursement. With the settlement, my total available capital was just over $341,000. Patricia set up Meridian Advisors LLC on a Monday afternoon. A Delaware registration, a Greenwich mailing address that routed to her office, a clean operating agreement with my name appearing only in a sealed schedule of members. We moved on the Ward Properties stake the following Thursday. The seller, one of my father's original investors, a man named Gerald Fitch, who was 71 and apparently tired of waiting for the company to perform, accepted $295,000. Below the nominal valuation, but Gerald wanted liquidity, and he wanted it quietly. Patricia handled the entire transaction. My father was notified of the membership transfer as required by the operating agreement. He was told that Meridian Advisors LLC, a private investment vehicle, had acquired Gerald Fitch's stake. He did not investigate further. Why would he? Gerald had been trying to exit for 2 years. A quiet buyer was a solved problem. It was a solved problem. I signed nothing under my own name. I appeared in no document my father would ever think to read. I went back to work the Monday after the transaction closed, took the 7:42 train to Grand Central, sat in my usual seat and ordered my usual coffee from the cart on the platform. Nobody knew. Nobody even came close to knowing, and I decided, sitting on that train with my coffee and my briefcase and my 34% of my father's company, that I was going to be very patient. Patience, in my experience, is the one asset people consistently underestimate. I want to be clear about something before I go further. I did not spend the months after that transaction sitting in a dark room plotting. That is not who I am, and honestly, it is not how any of this worked. What I did was go back to my life. I went to work. I ran on Sunday mornings. I had dinner with my friend Nora at the Italian place on Greenwich Avenue on the second Thursday of every month without fail. I watered my plants. I slept well, which surprised me, because I had expected some version of guilt or anxiety to settle in once the transaction closed. It didn't. What settled in instead was something I can only describe as stillness. A kind of internal quiet I hadn't felt in years. Maybe ever. The position in Ward Properties sat in Patricia's files and in my own, in a locked folder on my laptop, under a name so boring I won't repeat it here. I checked the company's filings periodically, quarterly, sometimes monthly, the way you check a long-term investment you believe in but don't need to touch. I was not waiting for a specific moment. I was simply watching, the way you watch weather when you know something is eventually going to change. My parents came home from the cruise on a Friday. My mother called on the following Tuesday. "You sound good," she said, which was her way of not saying, "I'm sorry we weren't there." "I'm feeling better," I said. "The doctors really did take such good care of you," she said. "I knew they would." "They did," I said. We talked for 11 minutes. She told me about Nassau and about a couple they'd met from Philadelphia and about a cooking demonstration on board that my father had actually enjoyed, which she seemed to find remarkable. I listened. I asked a question or two. I did not say. I signed a surgical consent form alone at 6 in the morning and lay in a hospital bed for 9 days, and not one member of this family came through that door. I said, "That sounds really nice, Mom." When we hung up, I sat for a moment with the phone in my hand. Then I put it down and went back to the quarterly report I'd been reading before she called. That was October. By December, things at Ward Properties had gotten quieter on the surface and more complicated underneath. I could see it in the filings. The Stamford vacancy still wasn't filled. The Norwalk project had pushed its completion date back by another 4 months. which meant carrying costs were compounding in a way that would start to matter significantly by spring. The bridge loan was being serviced, but only just. My father was, I estimated, about 8 months away from needing either a capital infusion or a major transaction to stabilize the company's position. What he needed, in other words, was a buyer. Or a partner. Someone with enough capital to take the pressure off, in exchange for a meaningful piece of the upside if and when the portfolio recovered. This is the part where I need to tell you about Nexford Capital. I knew of them professionally. Everyone in Connecticut private equity knew of them. Nexford was a growth-focused real estate investment group out of Hartford, well-capitalized, with a track record of acquiring underperforming mid-market portfolios and restructuring them into something worth significantly more within 3 to 5 years. They were disciplined, and they were serious, and they did not do bad deals. I had no direct involvement with Nexford through my work at Hargrove. But I had a colleague, a woman named Simone, who had done 2 years at Nexford before jumping to our side of the table, and over lunch in February she mentioned, without particular emphasis, that Nexford was actively looking at Fairfield County. I nodded and ate my salad and asked about her weekend plans. That evening I went home and I pulled up everything publicly available on Nexford's recent acquisitions. The pattern was consistent. They targeted portfolios with strong underlying asset value that were being dragged down by operational or financial mismanagement. They came in, restructured the debt, replaced underperforming managers, filled vacancies through their own leasing network, and within 36 months the numbers looked entirely different. Their average return on acquisition was 31% over 5 years. Ward Properties, on paper, had strong underlying asset value. My father had always had a good eye for location. The properties themselves were solid. What was dragging them down was exactly the kind of operational and financial mismanagement Nexford specialized in fixing. I did not call Nexford. I did not tip anyone off. I did not do anything at all except sit with this information and continue to be patient. What I understood, that very few other people understood, was that if Nexford ever came to the table for Ward Properties, they would need a clean deal. A straightforward ownership structure with no complications, no minority stakeholders who could create friction, no loose ends. In a transaction of that size, and I was already estimating it, could reach $40 to $50 million depending on market conditions. Every member of the LLC would need to sign, every member, including Meridian Advisors LLC, including me. I poured a glass of water and stood at the kitchen window again, looking out at the same street I had looked at the night I made my decision. The same intersection, different headlights, same corner. I thought about what my mother had said. You always land on your feet. She had meant it as a compliment. She had meant it to explain why she didn't have to show up. Some people are fine on their own, so you don't have to worry about them. You don't have to come. You don't have to cancel the cruise. You don't have to walk through the door. What she had never considered was that landing on your feet, repeatedly over many years, and doing it entirely alone, builds a particular kind of capability. A musculature. You get very good at reading rooms, reading documents, reading situations. You get very good at knowing when something is about to shift. By March, Ward Properties had been approached by Nexford Capital. I found out through a routine filing update, a letter of intent, non-binding, exploratory. But a letter of intent from Nexford was not casual. They didn't send those unless they were serious. My father called me in April. He called me, which was unusual enough that I checked the number twice before answering. Chelsea, he said. How are you? Fine. Dad, you? Good, he cleared his throat. Listen, I wanted to ask. You have contacts in the PE world, obviously. I'm working on something and I could use an introduction to a couple of groups. Nothing formal, just conversations. He didn't mention Nexford by name. He was being careful, or he thought he was being careful. What kind of groups? I asked. Growth-focused. Real estate adjacent. Hartford, maybe Fairfield County. I let a beat of silence sit between us. 2 seconds. 3. I'll think about whether I know the right people, I said. Let me get back to you. Appreciate it, he said. His voice had a particular quality in it that I recognized, the faint register of a man who needs something and is not accustomed to needing things. It was a sound I had never heard from my father before. Not once in 32 years, I told him I'd be in touch. I hung up. I did not call him back. What I did instead was call Patricia. It's moving, I told her. How fast? She asked. Fast enough, I said. Make sure everything is in order on our end. Every document, every registration, every filing. I want it airtight. It already is, Patricia said. Make it more airtight, I said. She laughed. It was a short laugh, professional but real. Chelsea, she said, when this lands, it is going to land very hard. I know, I said. I poured myself a second cup of coffee and sat back down at my desk and opened the Ward Properties file I had been building for the better part of 6 months. 41 pages of notes, filings, valuations, correspondence, the kind of file you build when you are not rushing, when you are simply watching the weather and waiting for it to change. Outside my window, it was a Thursday in April. The trees on my street had just started coming in. Everything looked clean and new and very patient. The invitation to Thanksgiving did not come. I found this out the way I found out most things about my family by then, indirectly, through a chain of small signals I had learned to read over 32 years. In late October, my mother called to discuss the holiday menu, which she did every year, and the call had a particular texture to it. She asked how I was. She asked about work in the vague way she always did. She mentioned that Derek was bringing someone new, a woman named Kayla who worked in marketing, and that she was very excited to meet her. She did not mention what time dinner was. I did not ask. We talked for 8 minutes, and when we hung up, I sat with the specific, familiar weight of that omission. Not a dramatic thing, not a door slamming, just the quiet confirmation of a rule I had always known applied to me and never to Derek. When my brother brought someone new, it was an event. When I existed, it was sufficient. I did not go to Thanksgiving. I made pasta at home. I called Nora, who was also avoiding her family that year for her own reasons, and we talked for an hour and a half about everything except the obvious. I opened a bottle of wine I'd been saving, and I ate at my kitchen table, and I watched the first snow of the season come down outside the window in fat, unhurried flakes. It was, genuinely, a fine evening. I tell you this because I want you to understand something about the months between the hospital and what eventually happened. People sometimes assume that a story like this one runs on rage, that the whole time, underneath the surface, there is this hot, pressurized thing building toward explosion. That is not how it felt from the inside. From the inside, it felt almost like calm, like the particular focus that comes when you understand exactly what you are doing and exactly why, and you have decided that you are going to do it correctly or not at all. Ward Properties continued to move. The Nexford letter of intent progressed to preliminary due diligence in November. I watched the filings, Patricia watched the filings. We did not speak frequently. There was nothing to act on yet. But when we did, our conversations were brief and precise, the way good professional conversations are. My father called again in November. This time he was less careful. I need that introduction. Chelsea, he said. The edge in his voice was new. Not aggressive exactly, but pressurized in a way I hadn't heard before. The company's bridge loan had a covenant review coming in January, and he needed the Nexford conversation to accelerate. He didn't tell me any of this directly. He didn't have to. I already knew. I'm working on it, I said. I need it this week, he said. I understand, I said. I did not make the introduction. What happened instead was that Nexford's due diligence team found the ownership structure on their own, the way competent due diligence teams always do. By December, they had a complete picture of Ward Properties LLC's membership, my father's 51%, a 15% stake held by a longtime investor named Howard Blum, and 34% held by Meridian Advisors LLC, registered in Delaware with a Greenwich mailing address. Their attorneys sent a formal inquiry to Patricia's office, requesting confirmation of Meridian's principal and their intention regarding the proposed transaction. Patricia called me the morning the letter arrived. Her voice was composed, but I could hear something underneath it. The particular quality of a lawyer who has been waiting for a moment and has just watched it arrive. They found us, she said. I know. I said, how do you want to handle it? Tell them Meridian is aware of the proposed transaction and is evaluating its position, I said. Tell them we'll be in touch within 30 days. There was a brief pause. That's going to make your father very uncomfortable. Yes, I said. It is. I hung up and went to make coffee and stood at the kitchen window for a while. It was a Thursday morning in December, gray and cold, the kind of day Greenwich does well. I had a 9 a.m. call with a client at Hargrove in 40 minutes. I had dry cleaning to pick up. I had a dentist appointment on Friday. Life continued in its ordinary way, and underneath it, 34% of my father's company sat in my name, and Nexford Capital's attorneys were waiting for a response from a woman my father had left alone in a hospital room and genuinely believed had no idea any of this was happening. The call from Derek came on a Saturday. This surprised me more than anything that had happened so far, because Derek did not call. Derek texted, occasionally, brief messages that required no response. A meme, sometimes, a link to something. The relationship we had was built on the mutual understanding that we were not close and had agreed, without ever discussing it, not to pretend otherwise. His name on my screen on a Saturday afternoon was unusual enough that I answered immediately. "Hey," he said. His voice had a quality I had never heard in it before. Careful, like he was picking his way across something uncertain. "Hey," I said, a pause. "Dad's pretty stressed." "Okay," I said, "this thing with the company," Derek said. "There's an investor, some LLC, that's being weird about the deal. Dad can't figure out who they are. He's been on the phone all week." I looked out the window. A couple was walking a golden retriever below. The dog kept stopping to investigate something in the gutter. "That sounds stressful," I said. "Yeah." Another pause. "Mom said you might know people in that world. Private equity. I know some people," I said. "Dad was wondering if you could. I don't know. Ask around. See if anyone knows who this Meridian group is. What they want?" I watched the golden retriever finally move on from whatever it had found in the gutter. The couple laughed about something. They walked out of my frame of view. "I'll see what I can find out," I said. "Yeah?" Derek's voice lifted slightly with relief. "That would be really helpful, Chels." Really, it was the first time he had called me Chels in years. Maybe longer. It landed with a particular weight. The sudden warmth of a family member who has remembered you exist because they need something from you. I recognized the feeling. I had been recognizing it my whole life. "Don't worry about it," I said. We said goodbye. I set the phone down on the counter. I thought about asking a question here. I'd ask you to tell me if you've ever had a family member remember your phone number right around the time they needed a favor. But I think you already know the answer. I think that might be part of why you're still watching. I poured a glass of water. I took a long drink. Then I called Patricia. 30 days is up in 2 weeks, I said. "Let's start preparing our response to Nextford. What are your terms?" she asked. "Full buyout of the Meridian position at current market valuation," I said. "I want a formal appraisal commissioned by a mutually agreed third party. And I want the meeting in person." "Person where?" Patricia asked. I thought about it for a moment. Not long. I had already known the answer, I think, since the morning I stood in the parking garage elevator with my discharge papers and a bag of clothes and called an Uber. "Greenwich," I said. "My apartment." The email from my mother arrived on a Wednesday morning in January. I was on the 742 to Grand Central when it came through, standing in the aisle because the car was full, one hand on the overhead bar, coffee in the other. I read it on my phone in the particular compressed posture of a commuter, trying not to spill anything. It was 3 paragraphs long. The first paragraph asked how I was. The second paragraph said that she and my father had noticed I seemed distant since the fall and that they were worried about me. The third paragraph said that family was important, that she hoped I understood how much they loved me, and that she thought it would be good for all of us to move past whatever happened in October, and focus on the year ahead. Whatever happened in October, I read that phrase twice. Then I put my phone in my coat pocket and looked out the train window at the Connecticut landscape moving past. Bare trees, gray sky, the backs of houses, the occasional flash of water, and I breathed through my nose the way I had learned to breathe in the hospital when the pain was bad. Slowly, deliberately, in through the nose, out through the mouth. Whatever happened in October was that I had emergency surgery for a perforated appendix and lay in a hospital bed for 9 days while my parents sailed past Nassau on a ship my mother had described as beautiful. I did not reply to the email that day. I did not reply to it that week. I filed it instead in a folder on my phone I had created in November. I had named the folder, without particular drama, simply Record. The folder had 17 items in it by then. Text messages, voicemails, emails. A photograph I had taken of the whiteboard in my hospital room on day 3, with the date and my name and the attending physician's initials written in blue marker. My discharge paperwork, the itemized hospital bill. Dr. Okonkwo's follow-up notes from my 7-day post-discharge appointment, which mentioned, in his careful clinical language, that the patient had recovered well despite having received no family support during the hospitalization period. I had not built this folder with any specific plan. I had built it the way you build anything when you are a careful person who has worked in finance for 6 years, out of a reflex toward documentation. You keep records, you keep them clean. You keep them because you never know when the moment will come, when a piece of paper matters more than anything you could say out loud. Nexford's formal appraisal came back in the second week of January. The third-party firm they and Patricia had jointly agreed on, a commercial real estate valuation group out of Hartford, assessed Ward Properties LLC at $47.3 million as a going concern, accounting for the existing debt structure and current vacancy rates. Meridian Advisors LLC's 34% stake was valued accordingly at just over $16 million. I sat with that number in Patricia's office on a Thursday afternoon while the snow came down outside her window. $16 million. I had paid $295. Suzu 14 months earlier. Patricia had a way of not reacting to things that I had always appreciated. She simply set the appraisal on the desk between us and folded her hands and waited. Is it clean? I asked. It's clean, she said. The methodology is standard and the comparables are solid. Your father's attorneys could challenge it, but they won't get far. And the transaction structure? Straightforward. Nexford acquires 100% of Ward Properties. All members receive their proportional share of the purchase price, minus any outstanding obligations. Your father nets approximately $24 million before tax. Howard Blum gets his 15%. Meridian gets the $16.1 million. I looked at the appraisal. I looked at the number. They still don't know it's me, I said. No, Patricia said. Not yet. I nodded. Outside her window, the snow was coming down in long diagonal lines. A maintenance worker was trying to clear the sidewalk below and giving up by degrees. Schedule the meeting, I said. All parties. My apartment. Patricia looked at me for a moment. Chelsea. When your father walks into your apartment and realizes, I know, I said, it's going to be a significant moment. I know that too, I said. I took the train home. I changed out of my work clothes. I made dinner, pasta again, a habit from Thanksgiving that had somehow stuck. I ate at the kitchen table and looked at the snow accumulating on the windowsill and thought about what Patricia had said. A significant moment. The thing about significant moments is that they don't arrive from nowhere. They are built, incrementally, out of smaller moments that most people don't think to notice. My father had built his by stepping onto a cruise ship, while his daughter signed her own surgical consent form. My mother had built hers in a text message about Caribbean sunsets. Derek had built his in a voicemail he had left while I lay with a drain in my abdomen in a hospital on a Tuesday afternoon. I had built mine differently. I had built mine in a hospital bed with a laptop and a legal pad and $341,000 and 14 months of patience. In mid-January, Ward Properties had what I can only describe as a bad week. The Norwalk project contractor filed a change order dispute that temporarily clouded the title on one of the company's assets, which spooked Nexford's attorneys enough to pause the due diligence process while the matter was resolved. My father's bridge loan covenant review came back with a condition flag, not a default, but a warning that further deterioration in operating metrics would trigger a review of terms. His attorneys called Patricia twice in 3 days asking about Meridian's timeline. Patricia responded to both calls with the same polite, unhurried answer. Meridian was aware of the timeline and would be in touch. I was running on a Sunday morning in late January when my father called. I let it go to voicemail. He called again 7 minutes later. I stopped at the river path, breathing hard, and answered, Chelsea. His voice had shed the last of its composure. What remained underneath was something I had rarely heard from my father. A raw, unguarded need that he couldn't quite contain. I need you to help me find out who is behind this Meridian group. I need to know what they want. The deal is going sideways and he stopped. Started again. I need your help. I stood on the river path with my hands on my knees, catching my breath. The river was partially frozen at the edges. The trees were bare and gray and very still. Dad, I said. Yes, I'll make some calls, I said. Give me a few days, thank you, he said, and the relief in his voice was so complete, so unguarded, that for a moment, just a moment, I felt the pull of it. The old reflex. The daughter who fixes things, the capable one, the one who lands on her feet. Then I thought about the parking garage outside my hospital window. I thought about 9 days. I thanked him and hung up and ran the rest of my route. That afternoon, I called Patricia and told her to send the meeting invitation. The date we set was a Friday in February, 10 in the morning, my apartment in Greenwich. Patricia would attend. Nexford would send their lead partner and their transaction attorney. My father's attorney had already confirmed he would be present. And my father, of course. What my father did not know was that his attorney had, at Patricia's suggestion, recommended he bring the full family, all LLC adjacent parties, to ensure a clean consent process. Standard practice for a transaction of this size. My mother confirmed she would attend. Derek confirmed he would attend. I read their confirmations in an email chain Patricia forwarded to me on a Tuesday evening. I read them twice. Then I closed my laptop and went to bed and slept. As I had been sleeping for 14 months, without difficulty, I had 1 week. I spent it the way I had spent the last 14 months, at work, on the train, running on Sunday morning, watering my plants. I had the apartment cleaned professionally on the Wednesday before. I bought good coffee. I bought the kind of sparkling water my mother always ordered at restaurants. On Thursday evening, I laid out the documents I would need on my dining table, and I went through them one by one. The Meridian Operating Agreement, the membership schedule, the appraisal, the correspondence file, the record folder printed in full, 17 items, hole punched, placed in a clear plastic sleeve at the back of the stack. I was not nervous. That surprised me, even then. I had expected some version of anxiety to arrive in those final days. What arrived instead was the same stillness I had felt since October. The door that had closed quietly in my chest the night I lay in a hospital bed and listened to my father talk about Caribbean weather. I set my alarm for 7. I went to bed. Friday morning came cold and clear, the way February mornings in Greenwich do when the sky has finally decided to be honest about itself. I made coffee. I put on the navy blazer I wore when I wanted to feel precise. I set the documents on the dining table in the order I intended to use them at 9:47. My phone buzzed, a text from Derek. On our way. Dad says this Meridian thing should be quick, should be done by noon. I set the phone face down on the counter. At 9:58, the elevator in my building hummed to life. At 10:01, someone knocked on my door. I opened the door and my father walked in first. This was not a surprise. Richard Ward had walked into rooms first his entire life. It was a habit so ingrained it had long since stopped being deliberate. He moved through doorways, the way he moved through most things, with the assumption that the space had been arranged for his arrival. He was wearing his good wool coat. He looked tired in a way that expensive grooming couldn't quite cover. A tightness around the eyes, a set to his jaw that I recognized as the expression he wore when he was managing something he didn't want anyone to know he was managing. My mother came in behind him. She was wearing a camel coat, and her hair was done, and she smelled like the perfume she had worn my entire life, something light and floral that I had always associated with Sunday mornings in the Darien house. She kissed my cheek when she came in. Her lips were cold from the outside air. "Chelsea," she said, "your apartment is lovely." "Thank you," I said. "Come in." Derek came in last, hands in the pockets of his jacket, looking around the apartment with the mild curiosity of someone who has never quite paid attention to where his sister lives. Behind him came my father's attorney, a man named Garrett Phelps, who I had met twice at family functions, and who shook my hand with the particular practiced warmth of someone billing by the hour. Patricia arrived 3 minutes later. She came in with her briefcase and her reading glasses pushed up on her head, and she shook hands with Garrett Phelps in the careful way that opposing attorneys shake hands when they are sizing each other up. Then she set her briefcase on the dining table and sat down. The Nexford representatives arrived at 10:09. There were two of them, a woman named Helen Marsh, who was Nexford's lead acquisitions partner, compact and precise in a dark suit, and a younger man named David Osey, who was their transaction attorney, and who had the look of someone who had reviewed the Ward Properties files so many times he could recite it in his sleep. They shook hands all around. Helen Marsh had a firm, dry handshake, and she looked at me for a half-second longer than protocol required when Patricia introduced us. I poured coffee. I set out the sparkling water. My mother sat on the sofa and looked around my living room with an expression I had seen on her face many times, a kind of assessing warmth, like she was filing away details to discuss with her friends later. Derek sat next to her and checked his phone. My father stood near the window, looking out at the street below, the way men stand when they want to project that they are not anxious. Garrett Phelps was the first to address the room formally. He had a copy of the Ward Properties operating agreement in a folder, and he set it on the table and cleared his throat and said that the purpose of the meeting was to facilitate a discussion among all LLC members regarding the proposed transaction with Nexford Capital, and that all parties had confirmed their presence and their authorization to participate. "Before we begin," my father said, turning from the window, "I'd like to understand who we're dealing with here." Meridian Advisors. We've been in correspondence through counsel for 2 months, and I still don't have a clear picture of the principals. That's not how I do business. Helen Marsh glanced at Patricia. Patricia looked at me. I was standing at the end of the dining table. I had not sat down yet. I had been standing there since everyone came in, very still, in my navy blazer, with my hands resting lightly on the back of the chair. That's a fair question, I said. My father looked at me. His expression was the expression of a man who has just heard something unexpected from a source he had categorized as background. The principal of Meridian Advisors LLC, I said, is me. The room did not erupt. We rarely do, in my experience, when something truly significant lands. What happened was quieter and, I think, more complete. My father's face went through 3 distinct phases in approximately 4 seconds. The first was incomprehension, a pure blankness, the look of a man whose brain has received information it cannot yet process. The second was something that moved across his features like a shadow, fast and involuntary, that I can only describe as the moment he began to understand. The third phase settled into his face and stayed there, a stillness that I recognized because I had been wearing it for 14 months. My mother made a sound, not a word. A sound, soft and involuntary, like air leaving a room when a window closes. Derek looked up from his phone. Garrett Phelps set down his pen. Helen Marsh and David Osei remained exactly as they were, composed and professional and very still, in the way that people remain still when they are watching something significant unfold and have been trained not to involve themselves in it. Patricia opened her briefcase and removed a copy of the Meridian Operating Agreement, the membership schedule with my name on the sealed appendix, and the third-party appraisal. She set them on the table with the quiet efficiency of someone who has been waiting a long time to do exactly this. Meridian Advisors LLC was registered in Delaware 14 months ago, I said. It acquired a 34% membership stake in Ward Properties LLC from Gerald Fitch for $295,000. The acquisition was properly disclosed to all members at the time of transfer, as required by the operating agreement. Mr. Ward, you received the transfer notice in October of last year. My father's voice when it came was not what I expected. It was not loud. It was not the voice he used when he was angry, which I had heard enough times to know well. It was quieter than that. Almost careful, Chelsea, he said. What is this? It was not quite a question. This is a transaction meeting, I said. Nexford has made a formal offer to acquire 100% of Ward Properties at a valuation of $47.3 million. As a 34% member, I have to sign for the deal to close. The silence that followed lasted perhaps 5 seconds. It felt considerably longer. My father started again. You've been sitting on this for 14 months. Yes, I said. Why, he said. I reached behind me and picked up the clear plastic sleeve from the stack of documents on the table. I set it down in front of Garrett Phelps. Within reach of my father, that's a record of my hospitalization last October, I said. The admission date, the surgical consent form, the treatment notes, the discharge paperwork, and the attending physician's follow-up notes. I was in the hospital for 9 days with a perforated appendix and post-surgical infection. I paused, not for effect. Because the next part required precision, Dr. Okonkwo's follow-up note on page 7 describes the patient as having recovered well, despite receiving no family support during the hospitalization period. I looked at my father. I signed the surgical consent form alone at 6 in the morning. I was discharged alone. I came home in an Uber. My mother made the sound again. This time it resolved into something closer to a word. Chelsea, Mom, I said. Gently, firmly. I'm not finished, she stopped. I don't want an apology, I said. I want you to understand that I am not doing this out of anger. I am doing this because at some point in the last 14 months I decided that I was done being the one who lands on her feet quietly and costs no one anything and asks for nothing in return. I am done with that arrangement. My father sat down. He did it slowly, the way people sit when their legs have decided before their mind has. He sat in the chair across from Patricia, and he put his hands on the table, and he looked at the plastic sleeve of documents for a long moment. Derek had put his phone away. He was looking at me with an expression I had never seen on his face before. Not guilt exactly, but something adjacent to it. Recognition, maybe. The look of a man who is understanding for the first time what the rules of his family had actually cost. My father looked up from the documents. His eyes were red at the edges. Not tears. Just the particular redness that comes when someone is holding very hard against something. What do you want? He said. I want the buyout at appraisal value, I said. Full market rate for the Meridian position, $16.1 million, payable at closing. Garrett Phelps made a note. My father began. It's the market rate, I said. Patricia has the appraisal methodology if you want to review it. The valuation is clean. Helen Marsh, who had not spoken since the introductions, cleared her throat gently. From Nexford's perspective, she said, we're prepared to proceed on the existing terms. The transaction is clean and the appraisal is sound. We need all members to execute the transfer agreement. That's all. My father looked at Helen Marsh. He looked at Patricia. He looked at the documents on the table. Then he looked at me, and in his face I saw something I had been waiting for, without knowing I was waiting for it. Not remorse exactly, not yet, but the beginning of it. The first crack in the structure of a man who had spent 32 years organizing the world around the assumption that his capable daughter would always be fine. All right, he said, quietly. All right. There's one more thing, I said. I reached into the stack and removed the last document. A single page. I had drafted it myself, reviewed it with Patricia, and had it notarized on Thursday afternoon. I set it on the table. Before I execute my portion of the transfer agreement, I said, I'd like everyone in this room to read this. It was not a legal document. It had no binding force. It was 17 lines long, and it said, in plain language, what had happened in October and what it had cost me, and what I had decided about it, and what I expected going forward. Patricia had told me I didn't need it. She was right, legally. But there are things that need to be said out loud, or written down, and witnessed by people who cannot later claim they didn't know. I had learned that in my work. I had learned it more completely in a hospital room, on a Thursday night, talking to a nurse named Gloria about a school play. The room was quiet while they read it. Outside my window, the February sky was the particular flat white of a day that has decided not to be dramatic about itself. A pigeon sat on the ledge across the street and did not move. I poured myself a glass of sparkling water and waited. The page went around the room in silence. My mother read it with both hands holding the paper, her camel coat still on, her coffee untouched on the table in front of her. I watched her eyes move across the lines, and I watched the moment she reached the part about the surgical consent form. Her hands tightened slightly on the edges of the page. A small thing. I noticed it. Derek read it quickly at first, the way he read most things, and then I watched him go back to the top and read it again more slowly. He set it face down on the couch cushion beside him when he finished, and did not pick it up again. Garrett Phelps read it with the careful neutrality of a professional whose job requires him to process difficult things without visibly processing them. He passed it to my father without comment. My father read it last. He held it for longer than anyone else. I did not watch his face while he read. I looked at the window, at the flat white sky, at the pigeon on the ledge across the street who had still not moved. I heard the particular quiet of a room full of people who are all deciding independently what to do with what they are feeling, and I let that quiet exist without filling it. When he set the page down, I looked at him. His face had the quality of something that has been under pressure for a long time, and has finally, in a single moment, been released from it. Not relief exactly, more like deflation. The particular exhaustion of a man who has been maintaining a position and has just understood, fully, that the position is gone, Chelsea, he said. You don't have to say anything, I said. I want to. Not today, I said. Today we close a transaction. Everything else can wait. He looked at me for a moment. Then he nodded once, a small precise movement, and looked down at the table, Helen Marsh. With the excellent timing of a professional who understands when a room is ready to move, opened the transfer agreement and set it in the center of the table. David Osei uncapped his pen and began walking everyone through the signature pages, methodically, starting with my father. My father signed first. His signature was the same signature I had seen on birthday cards and school permission slips and Christmas checks my entire life. A confident, forward-leaning hand that had always suggested a man who had no doubts about what he was writing his name on. It looked smaller today somehow. Or maybe I was just seeing it differently. Howard Blum had sent his authorization via Patricia the previous week, his 15% handled remotely by his own attorney. Garrett Phelps countersigned on his behalf. Then David Osei slid the agreement across the table to me. The signature line for Meridian Advisors LLC, managing member, was at the bottom of page 9. Patricia had a pen ready. She held it out to me without comment. I took it. I thought briefly about a Tuesday morning in October. The nurse with the clipboard, the fluorescent hallway. The pen that had felt heavier than it should have for a moment before I steadied my hand and signed. This pen felt lighter. I signed my name. I initialed the 3 pages that required initials. I set the pen down. Helen Marsh collected the agreement, reviewed the signatures with David Osei for approximately 90 seconds, and then looked up. "We're complete," she said. "Nexford will process the wire transfers within 5 business days of today's date. Each member will receive confirmation from our transaction office by end of week." She stood. David Osei stood. They shook hands around the room with the clean efficiency of people who have just concluded what they came to conclude and have other things to do with their afternoon. Helen Marsh shook my hand last. Her grip was the same as it had been when she arrived. Firm, dry, brief. But she held it for half a second longer than the others, and she looked at me directly when she did it. And what passed between us in that half second was the particular acknowledgement that sometimes moves between two women in rooms full of men when one of them has just done something that required more preparation than anyone in the room will ever fully understand. "Thank you for your time," she said. "Thank you," I said. They left. The door closed behind them. The room had 5 people in it now. Me, Patricia, my parents Derek, and Garrett Phelps, who was quietly organizing his papers with the focused attention of a man who would very much like to be somewhere else. My mother spoke first. Chelsea. Her voice had a quality I had not heard in it before. Stripped of its usual management, its careful warmth, its logistics, what was underneath was rawer than I expected. We didn't understand, I know," I said. "If we had known how serious—" "Mom," I kept my voice even. "You knew I was having emergency surgery. You knew I was going into the ICU. That was the information you had when you decided to board the ship." She looked down at her hands. Her wedding ring caught the light from the window. "I told myself you were going to be fine," she said. "You're always fine. I know you told yourself that," I said. "That's the part I need you to understand. I've spent my whole life being the one who is always fine, so that you don't have to worry, so that you can save the worrying for Derek. And I am fine. I have always figured it out. But fine is not the same as okay, and okay is not the same as not needing anyone. And there was a Tuesday morning in October when I was not fine, and I needed someone, and no one came." My mother pressed her lips together. Her eyes were very bright. "The doctors said," she started. "I know what the doctors said," I said. I was there. The room was quiet. Derek cleared his throat. He was looking at the floor, his elbows on his knees, his hands loosely linked. "I should have gone," he said. "I should have. I don't know. I thought about it. I told myself it wasn't that serious." He paused. "I should have gone. It was the most honest thing my brother had said to me in years, possibly ever." I looked at him for a moment, at his face, which looked younger somehow without its usual confidence, like a rendering that had lost a layer of finish. "Yeah," I said. "You should have." He nodded. He didn't say anything else. My father had not spoken since the signing. He sat at the table with his hands flat on the surface in front of him, not looking at anything in particular. In the winter light from the window, he looked older than I had ever seen him look, and also, somehow, more like a person. Less like the figure he had always occupied in my imagination, large and certain and slightly out of reach. "Richard," Garrett Phelps said gently, "I should get going, unless there's anything else you need from me today." My father shook his head without looking up. Garrett Phelps packed his bag. He shook my hand on the way out, briefly, with a look that communicated a legal professional's version of respect. And then he was gone, and it was just the 4 of us. My family. The word sat strangely in my mind. In that moment, the way familiar words sometimes do when you look at them too long, or say them too many times. Family. A 4-letter arrangement I had been trying to make mean what I needed it to mean my entire life. "I'm not cutting you off," I said. I had not planned to say this. It came from somewhere practical, somewhere honest, the part of me that had never actually wanted destruction, only accounting. "I'm not disappearing. I'm not writing a letter that ends things." That's not what this was. My father looked up. "This was me making sure," I said, "that I am never again in a position where I need something from this family and have no standing to ask for it. That's all. I have standing now, $16.1 million worth of standing." Something moved across my father's face at that. Not humor. It was too early for humor, and might always be. But something adjacent to it. Recognition, maybe, of the particular precision of what I had said. "You always were better at this than Derek," he said quietly. It was not an apology. It was not close to an apology, but it was the first honest thing my father had said about me in my presence, in as long as I could remember, and I received it the way you receive something that is not enough but is also, somehow, a beginning. "I know," I said. Patricia closed her briefcase with a soft click. She stood, smoothed her jacket, and looked around the room with the composed expression of someone who has seen many rooms like this one and has learned to let them be what they are. "I'll have the closing documents to you by end of week," she said to no one in particular. Then she looked at me. "Call me if you need anything." "I will," I said. "Thank you, Patricia." She let herself out. My mother stood up. She did it slowly, the way she moved when she was trying to hold herself together without appearing to. She picked up her bag. She smoothed her coat. She stood in the middle of my living room, and she looked at me for a long moment, and in her face I saw something that I think had been there for a long time, but that I had never been able to see clearly before. Not because it wasn't there, but because I had always been looking at her from a position that didn't allow for full clarity. She looked tired. She looked like a woman who had organized her love into something manageable and efficient, and had only just understood, in a room with a third-party appraisal and a 17-page file, what that arrangement had cost her daughter. She crossed the room and stood in front of me. She put her hand on my face, the way she had when I was small. Her palm was cool and dry and very familiar. "I'm sorry, Chelsea," she said, quietly. Without preamble or qualification, I looked at her. "I know." I said, "I did not say it's okay. I did not say don't worry about it. I did not say the thing that would have made the moment easier to move through. I just said, I know." She nodded. She dropped her hand. She walked to the door. My father followed her. At the threshold, he paused and turned and looked at me one more time. His wool coat, his tired eyes, his hands at his sides. "We'll talk," he said. "Yes," I said. "We will." The door closed. I stood alone in my apartment, in the February quiet, in my navy blazer, with the signed transfer agreement in Patricia's briefcase and $16. 1 million in wire transfers arriving within 5 business days. Outside the window, the pigeon on the ledge across the street finally moved. It spread its wings and lifted off and disappeared into the flat white sky. I went to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. I drank it slowly, standing at the window, looking out at the ordinary Friday afternoon of Greenwich, Connecticut. Then I called Nora. "How did it go?" she said. "It went," I said. She laughed. "That good?" "Come for dinner," I said. "I'll tell you everything." The wire transfer confirmation arrived on a Wednesday morning. I was at my desk at Hargrove when the email came through from Nexford's transaction office. Subject line: Ward Properties LLC, closing wire confirmation, Meridian Advisors LLC. I opened it, read it once, and set my phone face down beside my keyboard and went back to the report I had been writing. I finished the report. I sent it. I went to the kitchen on our floor and made a cup of coffee and stood by the window that looked out over Midtown Manhattan, and I thought about $16.1 million sitting in the Meridian account at Patricia's bank, clean and documented and entirely mine. I had expected to feel something larger, some version of triumph maybe, or the particular satisfaction of a long project finally concluded. What I felt instead was quieter than that, more like the feeling at the end of a very long run, not elation, just the clean, animal fact of having finished what you set out to do, and the body's honest acknowledgement of the distance covered. I finished my coffee. I took the 5:18 train back to Greenwich. That was a Wednesday in February. By Thursday, my father's attorney had begun conversations with my mother's accountant about how to manage the distribution from the Ward Properties sale, and it was in the course of those conversations that the full picture of the company's financial position became apparent to my mother for the first time. She called me on Friday afternoon. I was grocery shopping when the phone rang. I answered it in the produce section, standing next to a display of winter citrus, and listened while my mother, in a voice that had lost most of its usual composure, told me that the Ward Properties' debt obligations were considerably larger than she had understood, and that after the distribution was processed and the outstanding liabilities were settled, my father's net proceeds from the transaction would be closer to $11 million than the $24 million Patricia had initially estimated. The bridge loan had a prepayment penalty, she said, and there were 2 personal guarantees Richard had signed that nobody mentioned to me. "Mom," I said carefully, "did you talk to a financial advisor before today?" A pause. "Richard handled all of that. I put a bag of clementines in my cart." "Okay," I said. "Get your own attorney, separate from Garrett Phelps. Someone who represents you specifically, not the family. Chelsea, Mom. Get your own attorney." She was quiet for a moment. "Then, do you know someone?" I thought about Patricia. I thought about the 17 items in the record folder and the $295,000 and 14 months of patience, and the moment Patricia had said, "When this lands, it is going to land very hard. I'll send you a name." I said, Someone good. I finished my grocery shopping. I texted my mother the name of a family law attorney I respected, a woman in Stamford who was excellent and would not let my mother be managed. Then I went home and put away the groceries, and made dinner and ate at the kitchen table, and did not think even once about whether I should have done anything differently. The first call from Derek came 10 days after the closing. He called on a Sunday, which was becoming a pattern. I was on the river path, same as before, same gray February light, same partially frozen edges on the water. I slowed to a walk when his name came up on my screen. I need to talk to you, he said. About the money. Okay, I said. Dad's net is 11 million. After tax, it's going to be less. The Darien house has a mortgage on it that I didn't know about, and Mom's attorney is saying she wants. He stopped, exhaled. It's a lot. The numbers are a lot. Yes, I said. They are, Chelsea. I need to ask you something. His voice had the quality it had gotten on the phone in January, careful and uncertain in a way I had never heard from my brother before his mid-30s. Your share. I need to. We're short. On the buyout. Dad can't cover the full $16 from the proceeds without liquidating other assets. And those assets are. It's complicated. I stopped walking. I stood on the river path with the frozen water on one side and the bare trees on the other. Derek, I said. The buyout was structured into the transaction. Nexford wired the funds directly. It's already settled, I know that, he said. I mean, going forward. The family is. There are going to be expenses. The Darien house. Mom's situation. I was wondering if you would consider. No, I said. A pause. Chelsea? Derek? My voice was even. I'm going to stop you there because I don't want this conversation to become something we can't come back from. The transaction is closed. The distribution is done. What happens with Dad's proceeds and the Darien house and Mom's situation is between the two of them and their attorneys. That is not my responsibility. You're their daughter, he said. The river moved slowly under its thin skin of ice. A bird I couldn't identify landed on a branch nearby and regarded me with no particular interest. I was their daughter in October too, I said. When I was in the ICU, the line was quiet for a long moment. That's not fair, Derek said, but his voice had lost its purchase. He said it, the way people say things they know are not quite right but haven't found the better words for yet. Maybe not, I said. But it's true, we stayed on the line for another few seconds without speaking. Then Derek said quietly, I should have come to the hospital. Yeah, I said, you should have, I know. The bird on the branch flew off. I started walking again. I'm not cutting anyone off, I said. I said that in the apartment and I meant it. But I am done managing outcomes for people who were not there when I needed them. That's the boundary now. It's not punitive. It's just real. Derek didn't say anything for a moment. Then, okay, just that. Okay, it was not an apology either. But it was, like my father's comment about the finance, a first honest thing from a person who had spent a long time not being honest with me, or, I suspected, with himself. I accepted it for what it was and not for what it wasn't. I'll call you next week, I said. We can have dinner. Yeah, he said. I'd like that. We hung up. I finished my run. The Darien house went on the market in April. I heard about it from Derek, who called to tell me in the same careful Sunday voice he had been using since February. My parents had decided, after considerable discussion and the involvement of 2 attorneys and 1 very frank mediator, to sell the house and divide the proceeds and simplify. My mother was going to rent an apartment in Westport. My father was keeping a small condo he had purchased years earlier in New Haven that no one had ever mentioned. When Derek told me about the condo, I almost laughed. A condo in New Haven that no one had ever mentioned. My father, it turned out, had been more like me than either of us had ever acknowledged. The Darien house sold in May for $2.3 million. My parents cleared the mortgage and split what remained. My mother called me when the sale closed. She sounded lighter than she had in months, which surprised me and also somehow didn't. I have my own account now, she said. Patricia? I mean, the attorney you referred me to. She was wonderful. I'm glad, I said. Chelsea. A pause. I've been thinking about October. About what you said in the apartment. I've been thinking about it a lot. Okay, I said, I want to. I'm going to therapy, she said. It came out a little rushed, like she had been rehearsing it. I started last month. I'm working on. She stopped. Started again. I'm working on understanding why it was easier for me to tell myself you were fine than to actually find out. I sat with that for a moment. Outside my window, the May evening was doing what May evenings in Greenwich do. Soft light, the first real warmth of the year, the smell of cut grass coming through the screen. That's good, Mom, I said. And I meant it, not as a performance of graciousness, just as a fact. It was good. It was a more honest thing than I had expected, and I had learned by then to receive honest things as they came, without requiring them to be more than they were. "Can we have lunch?" she said. "Next week, maybe." "Just us." "Yes," I said. "Let's do that." We had lunch. It was not easy, and it was not seamless, and there were moments when we both reached for safer ground, and moments when one of us pulled us back from it. But it was real, which was more than most of our lunches had ever been, and I drove home afterward, feeling something I had not expected to feel. Not forgiveness exactly. Not yet. Maybe not ever in the complete form the word usually implies, but the beginning of something. A different kind of accounting between two people who have decided to try again with a more accurate set of numbers. My father and I had coffee in New Haven in June. He had found a coffee shop near his condo that he liked, a small place with good espresso and tables that were too close together. We sat across from each other for 90 minutes and talked about the company and what had happened and, eventually, about me, about what I had built and how and why. He asked real questions, the kind that required real answers, and I gave them to him. At one point he said, "I didn't see you." I looked at him. "I saw you. You were there. But I didn't see what you were doing, or what you were capable of, or what it cost you to not be seen." He wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. "I'm sorry for that. It was not a grand gesture. It was a Tuesday afternoon in a small coffee shop in New Haven. Two people at a table too close to the next one, talking honestly for the first time in 32 years. It was enough, not everything, but enough to start." Garrett Phelps called Patricia in August to say that my father had retained a new financial advisor and was exploring a smaller development project in Madison, and wanted to know if Meridian Advisors LLC might have any interest in participating. Patricia called me to relay the message. I laughed. A real laugh, the kind that comes from somewhere unexpected. "Tell him I'll think about it," I said. "Seriously?" Patricia said, "Tell him I'll think about it," I said again. I was still smiling when I hung up. I stood at my kitchen window. The same street, the same intersection, and the evening light was doing something generous to the trees, turning everything that gold-green color that late summer does when it is feeling particularly honest about itself. The pigeon had not been back on the ledge across the street, but a pair of sparrows had moved in, small and quick and completely unbothered by the height. I watched them for a while. Then I went to make dinner. 18 months after the closing, I bought a penthouse in New Haven. It was not a statement. I want to be clear about that. I had not spent the preceding months looking for a property that would mean something, some physical embodiment of what I had come through. I found it the way I found most good things, by not looking too hard, by staying patient, by knowing what I actually needed rather than what would look right from the outside. The building was a converted textile warehouse on the edge of the Arts District, 12 stories, brick exterior, that had been there since 1911. The top floor unit had been sitting on the market for 4 months because the ceiling height made it difficult to heat efficiently, and the elevator was original to a 2003 renovation and slightly slow. These were not problems to me. I had learned long ago that the things other people find inconvenient are frequently where the value lives. I closed in October, exactly 2 years after the hospital. I did not plan the timing. But when Patricia called to confirm the closing date and I looked at my calendar and saw it, October, the same week, the same particular quality of autumn light that had been outside my hospital window 2 years earlier. I sat with it for a moment and decided it was fine, more than fine. The kind of coincidence that feels, in retrospect, like it was always the shape the story was going to take. The movers came on a Saturday. Nora helped, which meant she mostly directed the movers while drinking coffee and making commentary that made the whole thing take longer and also considerably more enjoyable. By evening, the boxes were in, and the furniture was arranged in a rough approximation of a home, and we sat on the floor of the living room, eating takeout from a Thai place 3 blocks away that Nora had found on her phone while I was signing paperwork. "To the penthouse," Nora said, lifting a container of pad CU. "To the penthouse," I said. We ate on the floor and watched the New Haven skyline go dark through the floor-to-ceiling windows, and it was, genuinely, one of the better evenings of my life. Meridian Advisors LLC did not participate in my father's Madison project. I thought about it seriously for several weeks. I reviewed the site analysis, the financing structure, the projected returns. The numbers were reasonable, not exceptional, but reasonable. What I ultimately decided was that I was not ready to be in business with my father. Maybe someday. Probably someday. But not yet. I called him to tell him, I figured, he said. It was worth asking. It was, I said. The project is moving anyway, he said. Small but clean. No bridge loans this time, good. I said, and I meant it. Whatever had happened between us, whatever was still being repaired, I did not want my father to fail. I had never wanted that. That had never been the point. My mother settled into Westport. She sent me a photo of her new apartment in November. Small, light-filled, third floor, a view of the harbor from the kitchen. She had painted the living room a color she described as practically the color of hope, which was so unlike anything she had ever said before therapy that I saved the text message. We had lunch every few weeks. The conversations got easier, not all at once but in increments, the way most real things improve, slowly, unevenly, with occasional reversals that you get through by remembering the direction you are both trying to go. She asked me once, over lunch at a place in Westport we had started to think of as ours, whether I had ever considered telling her what I was doing. While I was building the Meridian position, whether I had ever come close to picking up the phone, I thought about it honestly before I answered. No, I said. Not really, she nodded. She didn't push. I think I needed to know I could do it completely alone, I said, not because I wanted to punish anyone, but because I needed to know for myself that I could, that I didn't need anyone to sign off on it, that the capability was mine regardless of whether anyone was watching. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You've always been like that, I know," I said. "I learned it from you." She looked at me. I looked back. And in that look was something true and complicated and unresolved and entirely ours, the specific texture of a mother and daughter who are working, at middle distance, towards something better than what they had before. We finished lunch. We split the check. Derek and I had dinner 3 times over the year following the closing. The first was careful and slightly effortful, both of us being more considerate than we naturally were, the conversational equivalent of 2 people walking on new ice. The second was easier. By the third we were somewhere approaching what I imagine other siblings feel as ordinary. Not close exactly, not yet, but present to each other in a way we had not managed before. He had a daughter in September. Named her Margot. He sent me a photo the night she was born. Just a photo. No caption. I stared at that photo for a long time. Then I sent back, "Congratulations," he replied with a single emoji. A small yellow face with its eyes closed, smiling. I bought Margot a savings bond. I mailed it to Derek's address with a card that said, "For when she needs it." Aunt Chelsea. I don't know what Derek made of that. He called to say thank you and his voice had the careful quality it had developed since February, the quality of a man who is trying to mean what he says. I think he did mean it. I think he is figuring out how I went back to Greenwich Hospital in December, not for any medical reason. I had been thinking about it for a while, and one afternoon I simply drove there, parked in the lot that had faced my 4th-floor window, walked in through the main entrance, and asked at the desk whether Gloria was working. The woman at the desk looked her up. "Gloria Reyes? She works nights. She's not in until 7. I thanked her. I left my name and a note asking Gloria to call me when she had a chance. I drove home. She called 3 days later on a Tuesday evening during a break in her shift. Her voice was exactly as I remembered it, warm and unhurried, with the particular quality of someone who has spent years talking to people at their most fragile and has not been made hard by it. "I remember you," she said immediately. The appendix, October. 4th floor. "That's me," I said. "You doing okay?" "I'm doing really well," I said. "I wanted to call because I never got to say thank you properly. You sat with me, that night when I couldn't sleep. You talked about your daughter's school play." A pause. "I do that sometimes," she said. "When someone is," she stopped. "When I can tell it would help." "It helped," I said. "More than I can explain." She was quiet for a moment. "Then what do you do? For work?" "Finance," I said. "Private equity." I could hear the smile in it. "That tracks." "You had a real focused look about you, even when you were in pain." I laughed. "I get that a lot." We talked for 20 minutes. About her daughter, who had, it turned out, gotten the lead in the play that spring. About the hospital. About small things. When we hung up, I sat in my kitchen in the dark for a while, not unhappy, just quiet. I thought about what 2 years actually looks like when you lay it out in its component parts. A Tuesday morning in October. A parking garage through a 4th-floor window. A legal pad and a laptop and $341,000. A Delaware registration, a Thanksgiving alone, a February meeting in a Greenwich apartment with sparkling water and a clear plastic sleeve of documents, a pigeon on a ledge. A pair of sparrows. A daughter who signed her own surgical consent form, and then, in the 14 months that followed, quietly and methodically and entirely without assistance, built the kind of standing that meant she would never have to do it again. I am not telling you this story because I want you to go out and acquire a minority stake in your family's business. I am telling you this because I want you to understand what it looks like to decide, at a very specific moment, to stop being convenient. To stop being fine in a way that costs other people nothing. I was always capable. I had always been capable. The capability was never the question. The question was whether I was going to keep making it easy for the people who loved me to look away, or whether I was going to build something that required them to look directly. I built something that required them to look directly. That is all any of it was. My mother texted on Christmas morning. A photo of her Westport apartment dressed for the holiday, a small tree, lights on the harbor-facing window, a mug of something steaming on the sill. It was quiet and modest and entirely her own "Merry Christmas, Chelsea. Thinking of you." I looked at that text for a long moment, then I took a photo of my own window, the New Haven skyline, gray and still, the first light of Christmas morning just beginning at the edges of the buildings, and sent it back. "Merry Christmas, Mom." I put the phone down. I made coffee. I stood at the window of my penthouse on the 12th floor and watched the city come slowly awake below me, and I thought about how far a person can travel in 2 years when they decide to stop waiting for permission. Very far, it turns out. Further than anyone who left you behind is likely to expect. Some stories end with a dramatic moment, a door slamming, a check thrown on a table, a speech delivered to a room full of people who finally understand what they did wrong. This story did not end that way. It ended in a kitchen in New Haven on a Christmas morning with a cup of coffee and a text message, and a city waking up outside a 12th floor window. I think that is more honest. The real resolutions, the ones that actually hold, tend to be quiet. They tend to happen when no one is watching except you. If you have ever been the one who was always fine, I want you to hear this. Fine is not a character trait. It is an adaptation. And adaptations can be changed when the conditions change. You are allowed to need things. You are allowed to build towards something without explaining it to anyone. You are allowed to walk into a room one day and set a stack of documents on the table and say, clearly and without apology, "I was here the whole time. You just weren't paying attention." If this story meant something to you, tell me in the comments. Tell me where you're watching from. Tell me if you've ever had to fight for your own, standing in a family that forgot to give you any. I read everything, and if you haven't already, subscribe. There are more stories where this one came from. Every single one of them is true in the way that matters most.